Dearly beloved, I hope this finds you as well and safe as you possibly can be during this strange and challenging season which we're all facing and journeying through together. It is now coming up on the beginning of November even, which means that it's been almost 8 months since we were last together worshiping in the sanctuary at the Church of the Good Shepherd in Raleigh in North Carolina, which seems oh so long ago in certain ways, and at the same time, we are even yet bound together by a living God and a loving Christ. And so we have mediums such as this through which to be together, in addition to our outdoor worship, our online services, and other ways of reaching out to one another in this time in safe and physically distanced ways. And so, while ordinarily we might be sitting together up in Shepherd's Hall, having some coffee and conversation, I've got some tea, so with you in spirit. This year, when we come to talk about stewardship, it's obviously a little bit different. And so this is the first of a few offerings that you'll be receiving about how one might think about stewardship, how one might live faithfully as a steward of God's during this season. And before I sat down to record this, I said to Mother Joyce, should it be more of a teaching thing, or should it be more personal? Because one is always reticent to talk about oneself more than is absolutely necessary. And Mother Joyce said, I think it's probably better to be more personal. And so, without getting too much into the weeds of my particular life, I thought that I might just share a little bit of how I've found the season to be life-giving and also challenging in terms of even now trying to identify how God is inviting me to live faithfully in this season, which of course, I don't know about you, but has been frustrating in some ways because the system that you had that was working great in May suddenly stopped doing that. And maybe it was by June, or maybe it was in October. But seemingly without anything having changed, what was faithful stewarding, what looked sustainable and manageable at one point, suddenly turned into something that wasn't. And of course, I suppose I've experienced this to some degree in being pregnant during this time, because there were things in the first trimester, which was, for me, in March and April, there were things that were definitely off the table for me. And then there were opportunities and things that came through later in the pregnancy when I was feeling better. And now I'm back again to the latter stages where I have to again ask God, what are you wanting from me right now? What is a faithful way of stewarding this life that you have given me? And really, primarily, when I ask that question, I'm thinking about my life as Imogen. And then I'm thinking about it as my role and responsibilities as a spouse and as the parent of a 2.5-year-old, and as a priest, and as a rector of a church. And then I sometimes don't even think about the fact that I'm also stewarding the life of somebody else right now, and have been doing so for about 8 months. So I suppose one thing that I find to be consistent about this invitation to thinking about living as faithful stewards, one thing that hasn't changed in this pandemic, is the fact that in my experience, God's desires for us, or God's instruction to us, of who we're supposed to be, the relationships that we need to tend to, in a large part, I think they come to find us. So, on a very basic, fundamental level, when you start to ask, in any given moment, Lord, how shall I be a faithful steward of the relationships of which I'm a part? The obvious ones are very much part of the answer. The people that you live with, the people that depend upon you, some of those people you will at this point not have seen in a good while, especially if they live in assisted living homes or if they're far away. Perhaps the people that you're called to care for are the people that live next door to you. Perhaps the people you're called to care for live next door to this church. So it's not a trick question. Who has God invited me to care for? And I think that's probably come into far starker relief in these days, because if you have been quarantining at home with others, suddenly those relationships have become center stage for your life. And I'm not sure about you, but part of what I've found is, of course, they're central because you end up spending a lot more time. I've spent a lot more time with my spouse and my son since the stay-at-home order first went into effect. But at the same time, we've also been doing this in a pandemic, and so one is needing to give space for people to be able to navigate this time in their own faithful way, and the space to discover what that is. Because, of course, none of us can be particularly, upbeat and rah-rah happy every blessed moment. It's a very stressful time, be it for the election, be it for illness, be it for sick relatives and friends, and relatives and friends who have died. And so how to both take that space when you need it and claim it, and also how to allow that space for others when we also need each other's support right now. And it seems, depending on the day, to be in such short supply. So I would say that what we're living through right now really is a masterclass in the stewarding of relationships. Because whether it's somebody at the other end of the phone, or whether it's someone who's just downstairs from you right now, or whether it's even someone you've never met, chances are you've found yourself very much needing to care on an almost round-the-clock basis for other people and for yourself. And I even think that the wearing of a mask is very much a practice of stewardship. It is a testament, a lived witness to the fact that how I live affects you. And part of my stewarding the relationship that I have, even with people that I don't know but I pass on the sidewalk, is to wear a mask. So in some ways, things are the same as they ever have been. The relationships that God calls for us to steward and tend, they come to us. They find us in our lifelong commitments. They find us in our habitual contexts of work and schooling and leisure. In some ways, there are new horizons opening up. And not just practices of mask wearing. How many of us have found ourselves suddenly having time and energy to cook, to sew masks, to knit prayer shawls, to pray for others, to call up a friend and see how they're doing? How many of us have found even scarily enough, opportunities to serve in ways that we didn't even know that we could, and that we might not have even wanted to. By editing videos for worship, for showing up on a regular basis to help record and to plan. One of the epitomes of all this, I think, is our music director, Dwayne Holloway, who at every turn seems to find a new way to steward not just the responsibilities entrusted to him as leading our musical worship of God in a time where singing is particularly sensitive as to whether or not it's harmful for people. Not only does he steward that responsibility, but he also stewards his own gifts. He finds new ways to steward his gifts and the gifts of others. He's tried so many different things, and he keeps on searching for and discovering and offering new ways for us to make music to the Lord together. And at the same time, with all of the joys and all the opportunities of this season and all the things that are the same, there are just some things that are profoundly different, even on a daily basis. So I don't pretend to have any answers to any of this. I have no cheat sheet about how you be the best steward you can possibly be through this pandemic time. I am certainly no model for how to live through a pregnancy well in a pandemic while juggling a number of other things. So don't model yourself or anyone else on me by any means. But as I mentioned in the letter that I shared with you all over the last week, I don't think that stewardship or even the spiritual life is about having the right answers so much as it is about locating a willingness within oneself to keep asking God good and faithful questions. And I think that's in part why the verse from Matthew rings so loudly to me as we seek to be faithful stewards together this year and in the coming year. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened. Because everybody who asks receives. And everybody who seeks finds. And to everyone who knocks, the door will be opened. So in this season where you're having so much to contend with, both the stuff that changes and the stuff that seems to just stay the same for longer than you care for it to, I would commend to your prayerful conversation with God, with your siblings in Christ, with your family, with your friends, how might God be helping you right now and inviting you to tend to your relationships with 3 sets of people? How is God inviting you? How is God helping you to steward the relationship you have with yourself? To be able to name where you are, how you're feeling, how you're doing, what your needs are in this season, whether they're reasonable or not, whether there's any hope of getting them met on any given day. How are you tending to the life that is yours, to your well-being? Sometimes it can be the last thought for some of us, so let's put that at the front. And let's say, not in any particular order really, but how is God helping you to tend to and steward your relationship with God? Is it online worship? Has that been a great grace? Is it not online worship because that really doesn't float your boat? Is it being outside, come rain or shine, as we worship together at a distance in person? Is it daily practices of gratitude for the gift of another day and a Carolina blue sky? Is it walking outside? Is it noticing more than you usually have time to? How is God helping you to notice God more and to take a more active role in your relationship with God? Maybe it's just the awareness that you need God, that you're relying on God, and that you're conscious of relying on God more in these days than you usually are. It's not a particularly feel-good experience, but it can be illuminating in terms of you realizing how much faith you've got that you didn't know you had. Because you really are leaning on God to help you get through and to give you what you need. And finally, we would say, how are you stewarding relationships with other people? Some of those are your most intimate relationships. The people that see every inch of you, warts and all. Whether you work with them, whether you live with them. Some of them you don't know. But God is inviting you to care about their life experiences and the hardships they face, and to respond in due season. Some of them don't agree with your politics. Some of them express themselves differently than you would. Some of them are on Facebook. Some of them are in front of you. How is God helping you and inviting you? And maybe instead of steward, you might play around with the language of tending, like you tend a garden. You know, you don't take total control over a garden and make it do what you want it to do. It has a life of its own. You tend it. You do the little things that you can to support its growth. So how is God helping you and inviting you to tend the garden of your own soul, the soil of your relationship with God? How is God helping and inviting you to tend the dirt out of which spring all your relationships with other people, and even, we might say, with creation, with the environment, with the world around you? This is not a conclusion. It's not the end of a conversation, it is the start. And it's one that we hope very much will be fruitful to you. Certainly in 2021, but even sooner than that. And you can rest assured that we're all praying over those questions, including me. And when you do not know the way, and you doubt very much that it's ever going to be clearer than it is right now, perhaps you will hear those words of Jesus from Matthew. Ask and it shall be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened. Because not just you, not just special people, not just saints, not just people who are right or holy, but everyone who asks receives. And everybody who seeks finds. And to everyone that knocks, the door will be opened. So keep asking and keep seeking and keep knocking. And may it be a peaceful and life-giving and challenging and frustrating and blessed endeavor as we enter this stewardship season in this year of 2020 together.